remind us what we're talking about here?
Thank you, Counselor. In front of you is proposed revisions to the public safety ordinance. There are many revisions, but one of the main reasons for the edits is informally known as delegated review, and it's essentially allowing the fire department to conduct plans reviews in place of the fire marshal's office. It's expected to speed up the permit and review process, so our developers can have a expedited process along with a one-stop shop for fire and codes. And also, instead of posing some questions to the fire marshal's office, some questions to the fire department, some questions to code enforcement, a developer will be able to come to the fire department, get all their questions answered, and we'll be able to move projects along. So a lot of the language in front of you is a reflection of the delegated review process. This has all been reviewed by Bill Lee, our city solicitor. There are other changes throughout the ordinance, specifically to make the ordinance gender neutral. There are some language cleanups essentially in here. Some of the language didn't quite make sense to after our city solicitor's review. I also cut and pasted a few sections in here as it relates to high-rise buildings, fire alarms, and sprinkler systems that were found in other sections of our code. But we felt at that time that specifically some of the items that pertain to fire alarms and sprinkler systems should be in the public safety or the fire prevention ordinance rather than in our property maintenance ordinance. So it could be a one-stop shop for everything pertaining to fire prevention. We added a sentence as it relates to backflow prevention and the requirements to have a backflow preventer. And we also added some language to strengthen the code enforcement, the director of code enforcement's position. As we we've really started to merge, and we're learning from one another very well. And there are times when the code enforcement officer needs a little bit more authority under the fire chief. And then lastly, one of the items that was deleted out of the old property maintenance ordinance was the ability for fire department or code enforcement to come into a situation, find an extremely dangerous situation, and act on it. And that was during the revision of the property maintenance ordinance. That was removed, and Director Bradstreet and myself felt that it actually was better positioned in the public safety ordinance because it literally is a matter of public safety. So we added some language there in regard to dangerous buildings. So with that being said, that's a very high overview of all of the changes that we've made to the public safety ordinance.
Thank you. So do we have any comments or questions? Yes. Can you go up to the mic, please, and just say your name?
Hi, my name is Robert Hatch, and I just had a few questions. I like where you're going with all that. It sounds amazing, but I feel like clarification needs to maybe be a little bit more. Are we still talking about being able to black label like a home and evict those people if it's unsafe? Is it black label that you used last?
Placard.
Oh, placard, sorry.
So basically hang a sign.
So is that still on the table? Is that still what you would like to be able to do?
Yes, if possible. If we found a dangerous, a significantly dangerous condition, and some of the conditions are outlined specifically in the ordinance.
Are there specific outlines for specific dangerous situations, or is it just going to be your call?
No, we've outlined a lot of the situations in the ordinance itself. So, for example, when there is imminent danger or failure of a collapse of a building or structure which endangers life, or when a structure or part of a structure has fallen which endangers life, when there's an actual potential danger to the building occupants, or in proximity of any structure because of explosives, explosive fumes or vapors, or the presence of toxic fumes, gases or materials, or operation of defective or dangerous equipment, or in a building or area of a building that is found in such a condition that minimum life safety provisions are not met, which could endanger the occupants, the fire chief or code enforcement officer is hereby authorized to order or require the occupants to vacate the building, and then we will post at each entrance a structure notice saying the structure is unfit.
Okay, some of those seem a little bit vague, as far as, you know, if you determine that there's imminent danger, you know, what's the determination? I personally agree with what you're trying to do. I just feel like there's some loopholes there, and that you seem like a nice person, but I'm going to be living in this town for many, many years, and you're going to move on eventually. And so I got to look out for the next guy. He may not be as nice as you. And those loopholes, I really think there should be a little more tightening down on that, because that's a lot of power to go ahead and placard a house and evict people, especially right now. So that's my 2 cents. That's where I'm at. I agree with you. I just think that there just needs to be more set guidelines. There we go.
And one other comment that I have is all of the language, not necessarily directed toward you, sir. All of the language in here, with the exception of found in such a condition, life safety provisions are not met, which could endanger occupants, as well as the language pertaining to the fire chief, was in our previous property maintenance ordinance and had been for years. And this was not exercised, and we don't see this being exercised often, but there are conditions that we have run into after a fire specifically. And one of the examples I would use is School Street. We had a recent fire there where the top floor of the building was heavily damaged and was structurally unsound, but people wanted to continue to live in the basement. And it was absolutely 100% a danger to them and to responders if an event would have happened. And that would have been one circumstance where we absolutely would have exercised this provision of the ordinance.
I just want to add there is an appeals process here as well. I did, you know, I take your point about having specific guidelines. I actually heard that from someone else. I think, and I read over the language, it seemed pretty specific to me. Yes, because people are listening online.
Some of the language, it seems somewhat vague. You know, the determination really comes, based how it is right now, it feels like the determination just comes down to the opinion of the, you know, the officer there. And I'm not arguing that this shouldn't happen. I think I've made that clear. I just want to make sure there's no loopholes that can be used in a dubious manner. Because we're talking about the eviction of families, people, you know, almost immediately, if I'm understanding correctly. And that could be life-threatening in and of itself. So I just think that we should have maybe a little more time to look it over, or maybe even just take some time to really go over it. I only heard about it last time, and we didn't even really go over, you know, all the specifics of it. And I don't even know where to see all of those. All I did was hear what you had to say for all those ordinances. I don't have that in front of me. But even then, it sounded a little vague on some of them. And this is such an important topic. I mean, the way it's written right now, I hope you don't know where I live. You know?
Do we, say for instance, if a family is displaced, if they get, removed from the home due to safety concerns, do we have a plan in place in regards to those, to find them a place to stay?
So the answer to the question is it would be situationally dependent. There is no circumstance at which we can clearly define the situation at which we're presented with from time to time. There has to be some discretion here, and that's why it doesn't say firefighter in here, and it doesn't say battalion chief, and it doesn't say deputy chief, because the authority to do this, in my case, has to rise to the level of the fire chief. And there are very few circumstances at which we would employ this, but there are a few.
And you may not employ this, but like I said, I live in this town.
Yep.
And I'm going to be here a good long time. I'm probably going to outlast your position. And the
I
next
would guarantee it.
And the next guy that comes through, I don't know who he's going to be. And with this, it's always easier or better to plan it out thoroughly and adequately before we move forward. Whenever you give a city official the ability to throw in the law enforcement, it's always worth thinking it over just a little bit. It is. So that's really just where I'm at. I'm not arguing the points. We just need to look at it a little bit and, tie off the loose ends.
Councilor Green,
Yes.
Code Enforcement Officer Bradstreet is raising his hand. Shall
Great.
I promote him?
Please, thank you.
Dan, can you hear us okay? You're on mute, sir.
Yes. Well, how you doing?
Hi there. Good. Go ahead.
Good. So I just wanted to quickly touch base here. So state statute already allows us the ability to secure a building that poses a serious threat to the public health and safety. That's state statute. What it doesn't give us expressly the ability to do is to placard the building with a statement on it with the reason why. And Chief Essler gave a great example about the School Street building there. So we had put plywood at every opening, but we didn't hang a notice on it because we're not expressly given that. This is something that a lot of municipalities have instituted for that reason, just to clear up the gray areas.
Is it fair to say that in the case where you made a determination to evict a family, that staying would be worse for them than?
Yeah, it would be detrimental to their health or safety. Absolutely.
But in the same breath, can't we say that if we
Yeah,
displace, but if we displace somebody, deeming their property not safe to live in and just leave them on the street, wouldn't that also be quite unsafe?
Well, I don't think there would ever be a circumstance where we would not work with those individuals to find alternative housing. Specifically when it relates to an emergency, we always engage the services of the Red Cross to help us. Additionally, the city's health and welfare department, it is not uncommon for us in the middle of the wintertime to take out our city credit cards and put and help people, find housing during these events. This is, I understand the concern, and I'm not arguing with it at all. I do want to point out this is language that's been in place for several years here in the city of Waterville that was deleted out of the last ordinance, probably shouldn't have been. And I think Director Bradstreet would certainly agree with me there. There are very few circumstances at which we would use this, but I would agree that when we would use this, First and foremost, the safety of the family is a priority. And in our case, the police department's case, code enforcement's case, we would always be looking to work with the family for alternative housing. There would never be a circumstance we wouldn't.
To remove the, I guess the burden of one entity being, the fire chief or code enforcement officer. So in this particular thing, it says the fire chief or, if we made this a collaborative effort, right, and we changed or to and, right, at this point now you have a couple of people reviewing the same thing, making that determination, and it might be better. I don't know, but at least at that point it puts the burden. It takes the burden off one entity. You know what I mean? Like if you have different views, and Dan, you and Adam have different views too. So like, hey, if I I see something, I'm like, hey, this looks, and then someone else says, well, I see this, and I don't think it's probably as bad as you think. Whatever that may be. I think that might be a pretty decent compromise, or it'd been enabled to make this this change here. But that's my 2 cents.
Is that,
Yeah,
are you moving an amendment?
sure. Let's move an amendment.
Second.
You can't amend it now.
Okay.
But you can amend it when we bring it up during the
Oh,
regular
okay.
meeting.
Perfect.
Okay, great.
Thank
Right.
you.
Did you want to say something?
I would, hello, yeah, I'd like to hear the chief's thoughts on that. Or Dan, we got him on here too.
Yeah, I have no concerns with that whatsoever. Yeah, and I got to be honest with you, that's our standard practice anyway. With any situation that we come across, whether it be code enforcement or fire department, that doesn't look right, we are in continuous consultation with one another on every single project that presents itself. The only hesitation I have is 2 o'clock in the morning, right? It's okay for me to get a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning because that's what I signed up to do. And I think we can make every effort to contact a code enforcement officer at 2 o'clock in the morning if necessary. But that's the only hesitation I have. I'm not opposed to it.
He looks good. Look at him. He's smiling over there. He's good.
Yeah, I agree. No issue with that. Checks and balances are a good thing, and 2 heads are better than 1. Absolutely. The 2 o'clock in the morning thing, I'm not. I don't know about, but yeah, I think it's a good idea.
As you mentioned before, this would be used in very rare circumstances,
Agreed.
correct? Yeah. I have a question. The School Street fire is an example. So I'm just curious what happened in that. How would that event have been different with this ordinance in place?
We would have placarded the building and made it very clear as to why residents should not have been in there at that point.
Okay, and the residents did leave in this case anyway, correct?
They did. There were times where people were reported that they were back in the building at 2 o'clock in the morning. And we did contact the police department and have them, keep an eye on it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm not a police officer, so I don't understand the laws exactly as it relates to whether somebody was in there or not. But we certainly would have give them a warning that it's not safe to be there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's notice to the public that there's an unstitched there, and it provides point of contact, whether it be who has any questions about the nature of the dangerous condition.
Dan, you were breaking up a little there, but could you say that again? Oh,
Broke up, all
looks
right.
like he's gone.
Disappeared.
Counselor Frankie.
Is there any procedure to remove the placard, or does the property owner just have to go back to the square one in terms of the building code?
Again, it's very situational dependent. If there's a fire in the building and there's structural instability, like the case of School Street, the real option is to demolish the building, so it's no longer a public safety hazard. But there could be a circumstance which we had a few weeks ago where somebody was running a generator on the inside of their home, and their home was filled with carbon monoxide, and the fire department had limited action as to what we could actually take. There is imminent circumstances, so we could certainly act in that case, but we would restore the condition, ventilate the structure essentially, so there's 0 parts per million of carbon monoxide, and that would no longer be a concern. So it's very situational on the circumstance at hand, and that is why, while I agree that it would be nice to have every situation in black and white, code and law as it relates to public safety, it is a bit vague because of the circumstances at which we encounter.
I gotta go back up, again. Real quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
I almost wish I had the intercom attached to me.
I would add that a placard would be removed once the dangerous condition is abated or removed.
I would be, coming from, the public side, not that I represent all the public, but I'm one of them, would be okay with even, the checks and balances in place, but also giving you a 24-hour unchecked ability to evict. Okay, so that gives you 24 hours to get in touch with the fire marshal while you've made a appropriate decision. I would think that would cover your issues of the 2 a.m. or that generator. This way, the fire marshal will be able to get a hold of you in a timely manner while you make the appropriate decisions.
I'm not sure. Are you suggesting that the fire chief would have to check in with the fire marshal?
Well, you were already talking about checking in with the fire marshal as checks and balances, if I recall correctly, right?
Code enforcement officer.
Or code, I'm sorry. Then I misunderstood, but still the same scenario applies. That you would be able to go ahead and do what you need to do in that 24-hour period to make that place safe. And then it either gets, the go-ahead after that 24 hours, or it gets shut down by whoever you have to talk to for your check and balances. Does that make sense?
Well,
Is
I think what you're
24
driving
hours
at is that the people ought to have an opportunity, if there's people living there, to make some arrangement. Do you have some? Is that just at your discretion?
I'm not sure I understand the
Well,
question.
okay,
Can you
so
repeat that,
if
Counselor?
you've got people living in a place that's unsafe,
Sure.
and you're ready to placard it, are you going to give them some warning? Is there some
Oh, yes.
time for them to make arrangements?
Absolutely. I mean, that's again standard practice in our organization. If there's a dangerous condition, the tenants are going to know about that. We're going to work with the tenants just like we always have and always will to try to find alternative housing. And if the situation warrants greater than 24 hours, then it's a really bad situation. I'm fully in support of working with Dan, 100%, fully in support of checks and balances, fully in support of a time period at which we can act. 24 hours gives us a lot of time to plan, to be honest with you. So if it's an event that, let's say it's a multifamily, residence, for example, that gives me time to consult with the city solicitor, with the city manager, and whatnot, and develop a plan moving forward. So I support all that.
So I guess my concern would be if there was a requirement to wait 24 hours and there was an imminent danger, then that's really just tying your hands again.
Well, I didn't think he,
No.
he,
Okay.
no,
Okay,
he
so I
said
misunderstood then.
allowing us to act immediately.
Okay,
And then within that 24-hour period, to make sure that the checks and balances system, a consultation with code enforcement in this case, continued.
okay,
That's
Got
how I
it.
interpreted it, sir. Is that correct? And I don't have any problem with that at all.
okay, great. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Okay, do we have any other people online or in the room that would like to comment? No? Okay. Then we will move on to our regular meeting. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Waterville City Council. There are agendas available in the file pockets near the entrance or online on the City of Waterville website. All items appearing on the consent agenda are voted on in one motion and vote. Generally, these items are routine in nature and do not require discussion. All items listed under unfinished business or new business are voted on separately. First, councilors will be given an opportunity for questions or comments. Once all councilors have had an opportunity to speak, citizens will be given an opportunity for comments or questions. Citizens must speak at the podium and identify themselves. Each citizen will be allowed one opportunity to speak and will be limited to 3 minutes. Finally, the councilors will be given another opportunity to speak or comment. Citizens who would like to speak on a topic that does not appear on tonight's agenda will have an opportunity to do so under the public comment section of the agenda. Pledge of Allegiance. Any conflicts of interest on tonight's agenda? Okay, moving on to a presentation from the recommendations from the Waterville Police Department organizational and operational review presented by the acting city manager and police chief.
Thank you. So I'm going to just give a brief overview of the report that was issued by the International Association of the Chiefs of Police. Back in October of last year, the city contracted with IACP to analyze the police department's organizational structure, culture, and leadership. The analysis was to provide data-based insight on the then current command and organizational structure, which certainly has changed since the start of this review, the internal leadership environment, the impact of organizational culture and leadership on recruitment and retention, and recommendations to improve agency stability and operational effectiveness. I think it's important to note that the police department is a dynamic and ever-changing organization as conditions warrant. There were numerous changes that have occurred since the start of the study back in October. Obviously, the former police chief had retired, and the interim chief was in place for 6 months, I believe, before he was appointed as the permanent police chief. We also have had a changeover in leadership at the city manager level as well. So the report looked at a certain point in time, so it's important to remember that when this report was undertaken. So they did look at a point in time to see what was in place at that time for the command structure and the number of employees and the conditions that were there. I will say that I was going to go through each recommendation, but Chief Bonney has a PowerPoint presentation that he will go through each recommendation that was in the study and give you a detailed analysis as to where we are with implementing those. I will also say editorially that one of the reasons that I appointed Chief Bonney as the police chief is because when he took over as interim, he had already started implementing some of the changes that are recommended in the study. well before the study came out, which I think is important to note. So with that, I think I'll just turn it over to Chief Bonney, and we'll go through the recommendations, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. I think Patty is going to be able to share the screen here to put the PowerPoint up. While she's doing that, I just want to mention to the council that on July 12th, which was 5 days shy of 6 months from being notified that we wouldn't have PSAP services, which happened on January 17th, we were able to stand up our PSAP at the Waterville Regional Communications Center. That was a Herculean lift for many city employees. The city engineer was involved, IT was involved. Our dispatch supervisor was, in addition to her other duties, heavily involved. And I just think that it is a great testament, not just to our city employees, but to the partnerships that we were able to work out with our colleagues at the state to get this done in under 6 months. So I'm very proud of the team that we built to do that. And we do have our dispatch supervisor, Sarah Batiste, here tonight, sitting back next to the fire chief. And in addition to that, Major Longley, who is the new support services commander at the police department, is sitting next to the fire chief on the other side. And next to him is Major Woods, who is the new patrol commander. And also, I noticed that the acting city manager put a hiring update in his report. But we do have several conditional offers out right now. And with the conditional offers that we have out, that would be 11 people that we've hired in the last 8 months, 5 of whom are academy graduates. So we're heading in the right direction for sure. And that's in part because of Bill's leadership, but also yours for the raises that you voted on back in January. If I could have the next slide, Patty, please. I do think it's important for us to mention Detective Sergeant Lincoln Ryder, who just retired. He was our acting deputy chief. And I note here that many of our successes that we've had over the last several months are directly attributable to his work. Most people, when they're winding down to their retirement, do just that. They wind down and they take on less work. And Lincoln worked just as hard on his last day here as he did on his first day. So we really do appreciate that, and it's worth mentioning. And then I do think it's worth mentioning, as Bill said, we've started a lot of these recommendations that came along in the report, but it is nice to have an outside entity like IACP acknowledge that we're on the right track and point us in the right direction. And so the following slides will discuss each recommendation pretty much in order. And if you can move on to the next slide, Patty, I'll explain how I did it. You'll see that on the left, you'll have a completed recommendation, and on the right, the recommendations that are in progress. And I go through following the format that they did in the study. So if you have the study in front of you, you can follow along. So in section 2, organizational structure, it recommends conducting a job task analysis to align tasks and responsibilities appropriately, and restructuring the command staff to create 2 commander positions by eliminating the deputy chief and the vacant lieutenant position. And so obviously we've done that. I just introduced the 2 majors who are the commanders, but we reviewed the command structure of several main agencies to include Brunswick, Windham, and Wells. The restructure that we chose is consistent with the IACP recommendations and will allow the patrol sergeants to supervise their shift and be less burdened with administrative duties. And that was one of the points made by the study. In addition, you'll see on the right, consider creating a corporal position. That is something that we formed a committee to research, and I've given them the timeline of December. So when we start working on the budget for the next fiscal year, we should know what this will look like. But it would likely save us money in overtime and relieve some of the pressure on the sergeants who are required to work a lot of overtime. Next slide, please, Patty. Moving on to section 3, organizational culture and leadership. The completed recommendations are develop effective communication processes, such as through technology systems or in-person meetings, and have human resources conduct exit interviews of departing employees. So with regard to communication, obviously that's critical in any business or public safety agency, but particularly in police departments. And so since December 1st, we've had 2 full in-person department meetings, and I've delivered 2 video messages that are essentially a state of the department to everyone in the department so they can understand where we are. And in addition to that, we're having regular command staff meetings. So I hope and I think that our communication is heading in the right direction there. You'll notice on the in-progress recommendations, part of improving communication was including implementing policies requiring information to be relayed up and down the chain of command. And as we move forward with the Maine Law Enforcement Accreditation Program, we will be comprehensively reviewing all of our policies, and that will be a good time to look and see if we should add that. You'll also notice that create a wellness committee within the department and expand support services for peer support. And this is one of our top priorities. And when I was having a conversation with Major Woods when he was first promoted, he mentioned to me that this was something that he absolutely wanted to take on. He's very passionate about it, and he has a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice with a minor in psychology. So he's well placed to look at this issue and help bring wellness and peer support to our department in a meaningful way. And finally, HR is going to conduct exit interviews. I think that's very important. If there's a problem, we want to know about it, and I think that's the best way to find out about it. Next slide, please, Patty. Moving on to operational effectiveness, you'll see that we have completed establishing training goals, assigning the management of training to a command level staff member, which is Major Longley, and focus on leadership development and training. And so this was a huge issue that needed to be addressed. And so we assigned Sergeant McDonald to come up with a map. So every person that gets hired at the Waterville Police Department in their first 5 years will receive X number of trainings. This is what you should have as a new patrol officer. And so in the person's first 5 years here, they could expect to get the Reed method of interview and interrogation, advanced OUI detection, and that sort of thing. The same thing if they get promoted to detective. You're going to get a certain basic level of training that's expected all detectives would have. For example, crime scene processing, homicide school, that sort of thing, to give them a basic job knowledge that they need to move forward. Our supervisors for the frontline liability managers, which is what our sergeants are, we're talking about the FBI Law Enforcement Executive Development Association trilogy. It's very important for them to understand contemporary practices and how to implement them. And so that's what we've done. And in addition to that, we've said, if you're interested in a particular track, go ahead and apply for it, and then we'll give you specialized training in that area. So we've really focused on training, and on the leadership development piece. When there's a promotion process, we've started mentoring the people that are in the process. So we recently had a sergeant promotion process, and for several months before that process, we were putting the people that we knew were going to be in the process with a sergeant, and they were learning how to run the shift and manage that liability that sits so heavily on their shoulders. And so what happened when they were promoted, they were ready to go because we had been mentoring them for some time before they get the promotion. And then everybody in patrol, sergeants and patrol officers, will be certified in community policing from the University of Maine at Augusta. And you'll notice on the right, these are the only 2 recommendations in the whole report that we haven't started, and it's shift to a data-driven model for service. And the reason we hadn't started that yet was because we need to have the command staff in place before we started making those changes. And just to explain what that is, very briefly, is right now, if a call comes into the police department, it's going to be entered into the CAD system. We're going to respond to the call, and then nothing's really going to happen with that. A data-driven model is we're going to look at that information, we're going to determine where the most calls are coming from, and then we're going to deploy resources to that area based on the number of calls that we're getting. So it's really, it is a smarter way of doing business, but we haven't started it because we needed to have the staff in place to actually do it. Next slide, please, Patty. You'll notice on this one that I have an asterisk next to use of force, and that's because I think it's important, and I wanted to expound on it a little bit in the next slides. But under completed recommendations, we also have engage in CIT training, which is Crisis Intervention Team, and it is designed to help our police officers support those that are suffering from a mental illness crisis, rather than the traditional adversarial role that you might have seen in the past. It's more of a support role. And so we signed on in the second week of December with NAMI Maine to reinvigorate that program. And also you'll see under completed is convert the communications sergeant to civilian for the communications supervisor. We have her here tonight, and that was completed early on as well. You'll see under in progress, the on-call detective is an issue that we've had, as the report notes. That was as a result of a labor dispute. We no longer had one, but we are in talks with the detectives and the union at this time to get that issue fixed, and I expect that we'll have that done. And then enhanced career for communication staff. We are looking at an assistant supervisor position to help out the current supervisor. Particularly with us becoming a PSAP, there's a lot more reporting requirements. And so that'll do two things. That'll help out the current supervisor, and it will give other people in the communication center a career path. Next slide, please, Penny. And so you'll see this is kind of a double because we've already done this, but convert the communication sergeant slot to an officer slot, increasing the sworn patrol positions by 1. That was budgeted for this year. And then over on in progress, revisit and further support Operation Hope. Operation Hope is a flagship program of the police department, and we're always going to support that program. We have an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer that's full-time with us supporting Hope. We have our Hope coordinator, and now that we have the community outreach coordinator, he is also working on some of those issues as well. But you'll notice in the report that it wasn't just talking about that, it was talking about the co-production of safety. And so that's really the police and the community working together to identify problems. And that's not a new term, the police and the community working together. That's community policing, and it always has been. But this co-production of safety is a relatively new term, and it's really us bringing the community in and giving them more input in how we police. And retired Chief Noel March, who is the instructor for our community policing class at UMA, he's the director of the Maine Community Policing Institute and the former United States Marshal for the District of Maine. He has agreed to come in and facilitate community meetings for us so we can give the community members the input that they need in our policing practices. Also, moving on, conduct an analysis of the current fleet and develop a fleet management program. We have to do a lot of work on the fleet, and Major Woods is working on that at this time. But we are reviewing multiple options to bring down our maintenance costs, which is becoming significant each year, and we're even currently exploring the options of leasing. So we're certainly in progress on that, but we have a lot of work to do. I put a asterisk next to body cameras because it's in progress, and I want to give you an update on that at the end of the slideshow. Next, thank you, Patty. So additional recommendations. Some of the recommendations that were in the report didn't get caught up in the executive summary, so I just wanted to mention these. One of them was update the current mission statement and develop a strategic planning process. This is something that Major Longley is working on doing, along with input from the rest of the department. And in our mind, the mission statement should both give the officers guidance on their day-to-day interactions with the public, but also lay the seeds for a strategic plan. And so that's what we're working on as it relates to the mission statement. It recommends developing a recruitment plan. We've had numerous conversations with members of the department on how we can think outside of the box, reaching out to high school students and college students. That won't necessarily be the solution today, but we want to establish a feeder program. And the other thing that I think is really important as far as it relates to retention, and this is something that is citywide and has certainly happened under Bill's leadership, is recognizing good work, recognizing when major life events happen in people's lives, and investing in our employees. It's incredibly important, and we, along with the rest of the city, have adopted that philosophy as well. And then obviously cultivate the concept of co-production of safety, and again, we're going to do that by starting to do that with community meetings. So I broke this out specifically to talk more in depth because I think it's incredibly important for the police department to have transparency around the use of force. So before the report came back, we changed the way we reviewed our use of force reports. And one of the things that we really started focusing on was the decision points of the police officers, because they're going to be judged on how another reasonable officer in their situation would have reacted. So we need to know what they were thinking at the critical point where they decided to use a certain amount of force. And then the other thing we wanted them to be very specific about was what exactly they did and how they did it. And so this can help us understand the use of force better, but what it can also do is really help us with our liability management, because that's how they're going to be judged, how another officer in the same circumstances would have reacted. So in addition to this, we have sent a supervisor and a detective to de-escalation instructor class and multiple members of the department, including Major Longley, to force on force training. And so with new equipment that we hope to purchase with the Justice Assistance Grant, we'll be able to effectively train officers on the full spectrum of force while emphasizing the possibility of de-escalation. And the goal is to bring the best tool to the table for each situation, which hopefully allows the officers to diffuse the situation while using a lower level of force before it escalates to a higher level of force. And so I included here, and I'm just going to read this because this summarizes kind of how the officers go through their decision-making process. And so this is a situational use of force model. It's different than the use of force continuum that when I started out as a police officer we used. And the reason that it's different is because when you moved up the continuum, sometimes it was hard to move down. This situational use of force is the officer plucks the option from the situational use of force options, and there's no up or down. We're going to choose which one we need for the moment. And so situational use of force is defined as a dynamic process by which an officer assesses, plans, and responds to situations that threaten public and officer safety and requires the use of force and control. The process includes an assessment of the situation and circumstances immediately confronting the officer, including but not limited to the severity of the crime or suspected offense, the level and imminence of any threat to the officers or public, the level of resistance, the risk or apparent attempt to flee or escape, the suspect's behavior and individual actions, which include cooperative, resistive, assaultive, high risk, or life-threatening, which is posing a threat of death or serious bodily injury, and the officer's perceptions and tactical considerations. Based on this assessment, the officer selects from the available response options while continuing to evaluate the evolving situation, adapting a plan and actions that are appropriate and effective in bringing the situation under control. And you know, one of the things that's so important to remember from this is they have split seconds to do that and are often judged for many years to come on those split second decisions. So it's really important to remember that. If I could get the next slide, Patty. I'm not going to go over all of the officer response options, but in the report, it noted that our use of force reports seemed higher than agencies of similar size that they had investigated and studied before. And so what I want to note about this particular diagram is anything to the right of the vertical line and anything below the horizontal lines is going to result in a use of force report being done at the Waterville Police Department. So anything beyond just, sir, ma'am, turn around, put your hands behind your back, and them cooperating, that's going to result in a use of force report. And that's not how it's done everywhere, including other places in there. And that accounts for some of our higher numbers. If I could have the next slide, Patty. These are some of the tools that we have that they're using. So we have OC spray, which is commonly referred to as mace, electric weapons, commonly referred to as taser, the pepper ball system, which is essentially a chemical powder of the same composition as the OC that's in what would amount to being a paintball, and it is fired from what is basically a paintball launcher. It gives us that intermediate distance so we can get back and away from a situation and hopefully be able to use a lower level of force. And then baton, handgun, and rifle. So out of those, if you display your taser, not even use it, just display it. If you display the pepper ball system, a handgun or a rifle, that's going to be a use of force report here in Waterville. I could have the next slide, Patty. The tables that I have, this total use of force incidents versus use of force reports, you'll notice that the incidents are fewer than the total use of force. So oftentimes we'll have multiple officers on scene and they would all do a use of force report, so you have fewer incidents and more reports. An example of that is if they're responding to a shooting and they stop a vehicle and they do a high-risk felony stop, multiple officers would be pointing their firearms at the subjects. Even if the subjects cooperated, walked back, and were handcuffed with no other use of force, that would be multiple use of force reports. And I think if you look at the table on the right, what is very telling is that in 20 and 21, our display of force was a full third of our total use of force reports. In 22, it was 27%. And then if you look at this year, we're 7.5 months through the year, and we are significantly down on both display and use of force. And so I think that accounts for the discrepancy that they were looking at. And I did have a conversation with Colonel Baker, who's the man that did the study, and he agreed that different agencies report in different ways. And while he didn't have a specific department to point to or specific numbers to give me about what was normal, he did say that if a fair number of your uses of force are display, then you might be all set, is what he said. And so I think that looking at it as comprehensively as we have and breaking it down like this, I think that we're on the right track. And of course, we can always do better. But that's the next slide. This is one of the things that will help us with transparency and monitoring use of force, as well as improve our criminal prosecution rate. We will be rolling out a pilot program for body cameras on July 25th. We've requested a 45-day program, and that's what the company is going to give us. And so we'll actually get to have hands-on body cameras and see how they work here at the police department. There's some really unique software with this particular company that we're looking at, so we're looking forward to trying that out. And I am open to questions.
Okay. Any counselors have questions? I have one. First of all, thank you very much for this presentation. It really helps to see what's in the report and how you've responded to it. I was just wondering if the body cam pilot is with the same company that we voted on a couple years ago.
So
Because I remember there's quite a range in products there.
Yes, there was. Actually, we had received 3 bids from different companies when we agreed to go out to bond. And when Bill and I did the research, the council agreed to bond for a certain amount, which was body worn by utility. It was the price that that particular company had put out. But at that point, you guys hadn't voted to approve that, just go to bond for that amount of money. And so this particular pilot program that we're going with right now is a different company, Lens Lock, and they're a little bit cheaper than body worn. And you know, it was pointed out at the time that, you know, we're bidding on, or we're going out to bond on the Cadillac product. Would another product be good? What I think we're looking at in this particular instance is a good product, and they're the only one that's letting us test it out, by the way, so that I think says something. I think it's a good product, and it's got some unique software that we'll be able to look at, and it is a little bit cheaper than what we initially went out to bond for.
Okay. One of the things that I remember about the presentation was the difference between a system which would go on automatically and avoid human error of, oh, I forgot to turn on the camera.
That's right.
Does this one have that feature where it's an automatic camera rolling every time you get in the...
It does. So my concerns, which the reason that we bonded for that large amount for one company was twofold. One is it had the automatic on features, and the other was how it mounted. And so the mounting was, it's integrated into the uniform. Mm-hmm. And so that was good, but if some of our officers have different types of vests that they put on if they're going to a different type of call, a higher risk call. And so if it was integrated into the uniform, that could be really difficult changing that out. The other companies have kind of caught up on their mounting options. The particular company that we're looking at, they give us as many mounts as we ask for per camera. And all of our vests have this webbing here, which is called MOLLE. And so they have mounts that latch into the MOLLE, and then the camera hooks down onto them, twists, and locks. So that resolves the problem that I had about the cameras falling off and pointing up at the sky in a critical incident. And in addition, the one that we're trying out, not during the pilot period, but if we end up buying the product, we'll have Bluetooth on features. You turn your blue lights on, the camera will go on. It can be set to go on when the door opens. So there's a variety of options that will go automatic on with these cameras as well.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to be able to have a pilot
Absolutely.
to try it out. So
Yep.
that's good. Thank you.
While we're on this topic, could you just talk a little bit about the policy and protocol around how that footage is stored and handled and accessed by various interested parties?
Sure. So because it is a change in working conditions, we are going to have to negotiate impact with the union on the policy. Major Longley reached out and was able to obtain a model policy for the cameras, which we have more or less developed at this point. But we will be sitting down with the union to give them a chance to look at that as well. But I assure you, you won't be seeing Waterville Police Department footage on YouTube.
I really applaud the direction. Well, I mean, it's good that the study is also recommending, but towards the community policing. And I'm not just channeling Jay. I'm actually also very interested in that approach, and I think it's going to have a terrific impact on policing in Waterville. So, thank you for that. I'm wondering if anyone in the department's taken, I'm sure you have, but I'd like to know what you're doing to look at diversity in the police force. both racial diversity and gender diversity.
Sure. So actually, the city manager and I just had a conversation about this the other day. Brunswick just signed on to a program to get 30% of the department up to staff with women officers. And so right now, we actually aren't bad on our gender numbers. We have 3 women currently on the department. One of them is a supervisor. We lost a female supervisor several months ago, but we gained a new one in this most recent promotion process. And so I think that is great. And I forwarded Major Longley the information regarding the 30% program. So we absolutely are looking at that. You know, this area is not a particularly diverse area. And so I encourage diverse applicants to come and apply to the police department, because one of the things that I do believe in and I think is important is that the police department should look like the community that it polices.
What are some of the strategies that these other communities are using specifically? Like how are they trying to increase their numbers?
Sure. So Brunswick just signed on to a program which is designed to get 30% women on the police department, and that's actually a nationwide program. So I just sent that information to Major Longley for him to research, and he's had one of two things going on in his first couple of weeks as major, but we're absolutely going to get to that. And as far as, you know, recruiting, you know, other diverse populations, that's difficult. And so it's difficult like recruiting anybody to do the job, because recruiting is hard right now. But we're absolutely open to looking into new ideas and moving forward.
Hopefully this community policing model will help with recruitment as well as the other benefits.
I agree. When you see positive things in the news about your police department and the police department doing, quite frankly, fun things in the community, I think it maybe makes you want to come work there.
I would just add that, you know, we do have a community that's changing in terms of racial diversity, and will do so even more with every year. So I would love to see some work being done just on education around diverse populations. You know, racial diversity, also gender and sexuality, you know, the full gamut.
Absolutely.
Because I think that will lay the groundwork for the police force to be successful in recruiting people, more diverse force as well.
Absolutely.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much. And it's great to see all of you here as well. Thank you. Moving on to the city manager report.
Yes, thank you. A few things that I want to update the council on and the public that I'll highlight from my report, and I'll also add a few things. So the Taconic Bridge closure, as we all know, it's been closed in the evenings, Sundays through Thursdays, overnight. Starting on Monday, August 7th, it will be closed. Both lanes of traffic will be closed. The bridge will be completely closed for a week, reopening on Saturday, August 12th. And just to make sure that it bothers everyone, starting on August 14th, so it'll be open for a day, it will enter its basically 3-year one-lane closure. So traffic will be closed for traffic going from Winslow to Waterville. We'll still be able to have eastbound traffic, but not westbound traffic. So that'll start on August 14th at 6 o'clock in the morning and last for, I think it's 1,095 days, which is over 3 years, for them to deconstruct and reconstruct the bridge. So please make note of that. We do have that posted on our website and social media sites as well. As Chief Bonney mentioned in a little bit in his report prior to the presentation, we do have some updates for police department staffing. Sergeant Kyle McDonald was transferred from patrol sergeant to detective sergeant, replacing the now retired detective sergeant Lincoln Ryder. I'll also say that he has a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from Husson University and a certificate in Community Policing from the University of Maine in Augusta. He was hired by Waterville in 2011 and became a police training officer within the department. He was promoted to detective in 2017, later promoted to patrol sergeant, where he supervised the police training officer program and handled numerous major crime scene as the on-duty supervisor. He also serves in the U.S. Coast Guard Reserve and brings a passion for training and education to the detective division. Officer Tanya Allen was promoted to the rank of patrol sergeant, replacing Detective Sergeant McDonald in the patrol division. She has a bachelor's degree in justice studies from the University of Maine and extensive experience in law enforcement and public safety dispatching dating back to 2003. She's worked for Waterville PD since 2018 after serving with the Oakland Police Department. She is a drug recognition expert, forensic phlebotomist, breath test device instructor, and holds her intermediate certificate from the Criminal Justice Academy. And as Chief Bonney had said, our previously acting communications center supervisor, Sarah Batiste, and dispatch supervisor of the year, by the way, again, has been made a permanent communications center supervisor. And again, I think kudos goes out to her for the amount of work that she did in getting us to be a 911 PSAP center, along with obviously the folks that Chief Bonney had recognized, as well as himself. The amount of work that went into that in 6 months to get us to where we are today really is amazing. Kudos also to Joel Way in our IT department, and Andy McPherson, the city engineer, for pitching in his many talents as well. But to do that with very little disruption in that short amount of time, and having signed contracts with the communities really is amazing, let alone the legislative act that had to be approved and put in place. So I know that Maria Jakes from the state was here today touring the facility, which is fantastic. So definitely kudos to everybody that was involved in that project, especially Sarah and Chief Bonney.
I
Certainly
think that
appreciate
deserves a round of applause.
I also want to point out, and I know Chief Bonney had said this too, we have several candidates that are in the hiring process for patrol positions, and we are hiring several candidates and have that are what are called Blue Pen, which are Maine Criminal Justice Academy graduates that have service in other communities. That goes to basically what the council had done over this past year, really. We're talking about recruiting employees and well-qualified employees, and without having the wages and the benefits there in place, we wouldn't be doing as well as we are. So, credit goes to the council for having the courage, really, honestly, to be able to do that. It really, not just in the police department, but throughout the city is appreciated by everyone. So we do thank you for that. You'll notice that in the city manager's report, there was a floor plan of 46 Front Street, the building that we are leasing for council chambers as well as other activities. We did try to put that together so you could see what portion of that building of the leased area will be designated as the council chambers and how much space we'll be using, which is about 1,700 square feet. And we put a rough sketch in there as to what we're thinking as to how we'll orient the council chambers with the table and the audience chairs, podium, that sort of thing. I obviously don't want to do an open design in a council meeting, but I want to say to all the councilors, if you have any thoughts about that layout, that design, if you want to go in and see the space that we're looking at, just contact me and let me know your thoughts on that. We have to make decisions about the layout before we can actually do some construction, some renovation work, and putting in outlets and, wiring for the AV and all of that. So take a look at it. It is a little bit different shape than what we have currently here, so we can shape things differently within the room as well. And of course, it's all just estimations based on what we have for information. So please take a look at that and let me know your thoughts around that as well. I think that is it for me, unless you have any questions.
So I have a question about the other uses in that space. Because we're community uses is part of the
Yes.
building. It's not just council chambers. So
Right.
what are you thinking about a process on discussing that?
Yeah, I'm thinking that that we should have some public discussions around that, starting in once the new city manager takes position, and then have some discussions and find out what needs we have. We know some of them obviously that have been mentioned previously, such as a warming or a cooling shelter space, which certainly can be accommodated there. But we need to know what else can we do there. But I think it's important to decide the space for the council chambers, and then we can start having that discussion later on this fall. And I'm not saying, November, I'm saying, September, when we should start having those discussions, I think, because I think it is important. And we can have, some open discussions about that.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to councilor comments and committee reports. Councilor Frankie.
The Historic Preservation Committee met last week, and we're looking at a couple of other cities that have ordinances for historic preservation, particularly Biddeford, and we just started looking at the Augusta ordinance. So we're going to continue to work on that, and we're hoping that the new city manager will have some positive input, as I believe Saco's been working on their own historic preservation ordinance. So we'll be bringing something, I think, to the council sometime this fall.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Climate Resiliency Committee, last 2 weeks ago, we had reported that we were going to be submitting a community action grant for the EV, for the community resource officer. That grant, there was some 11th hour fine print about the percent that kind of a grant could cover for one of those vehicles. So it would have caused us to leave about 30 grand on the table. So we decided to pass on this round, but we're going to resubmit the next funding round. So that grant did actually not get submitted. So.
Okay, thank you. Do you know when the next round is?
About 6 months.
Yeah, 6
Okay.
months, right.
All right.
And I think we'll be, and it was in my report as well that I didn't touch on, but I think we'll be much more prepared for the next grant round,
Right.
so we can actually have a good plan in place. I think would be potentially looking at an electric vehicle, but it also allows us in the police department's fleet management to really take a look at what our needs are, and see what we're looking at there as well. But it also allows us some looking at other possible options for the grant, such as heat pumps for schools, that type of thing.
And the charge of that committee has really two aspects. There's mitigation and then there's adaptation. So heat pumps, EV, that's mitigation, but a really important thing is adaptation, and we need to think very deeply about how to address those kinds of questions. So that's something that's going to require a little bit more thought and perhaps funding for some outside expertise to develop a plan.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just want to mention that the ARPA committee is going to meet on August 15th at 2 p.m. At City Hall. That will be on the website if it's not already. And the Housing Committee's meeting tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the Michael Roy room. So this is our last meeting with Bill Post as acting city manager. So I just wanted to express the council's appreciation to him for the past 6 months of leadership. It's been quite a journey for him and for us, but he has shown immense intelligence and grace and capacity, and fortunately, we still have him as assistant city manager, which is wonderful. And we have our new city manager coming on, of course. But I think we all just want to acknowledge how lucky we are to have had Bill step in at short notice and lead us through this challenging time. So thank you, Bill.
You're here.
Thank you, but again, I'll simply say that I was just doing the job, and I look to my department heads as well and the staff in the city, because without them and their support and their help, we certainly couldn't have done what we've done over the last 6 months or so, and obviously the council's support. So I appreciate that. I'm thrilled to be continuing on as the assistant city manager and looking forward to doing some great things as we move forward with our new manager in place. So thank you.
Yes, we have an amazing team here in Waterville. So, and it is teamwork. All right, we're going to move now to public comments. Anna.
Good evening. I'm Anna Holdener. I'm with the South End Neighborhood Association. And I just want to announce that next, or in just a couple of weeks, on August 1st, we are going to be back in full, regalia with our South End National Night Out Festival. It is a festival that it's kind of the pinnacle of our year. It's a festival that we work towards, and kind of we take it to celebrate the community partners that we have, the work that we've done, and we are absolutely thrilled. So the festival itself is, again, Tuesday, August 1st. I know that it's a council meeting, but the festival starts at 4:30, so you can still stop by, and it does go until 7:30. There will be free barbecue, rock wall, live music, bounce house. Our lovely friends in uniform will be there. And yeah, it's going to be a grand old time. And this is also our annual appeal kind of time, where we are doing fundraising, not just to pay for the festival, but for all the programs that we do. And over the last couple of years, we've actually increased quite a bit, a lot of our community outreach. So if anyone is interested, KVCAP is our fiscal agent, and you can always go to their website, kvcap.org, follow all the buttons to donate. And once you get to where you want the money to go, we are on the drop-down menu as South End Neighborhood Association. So that's it. I hope to see you on August 1st. Thanks.
Anyone else?
I have a member online,
Okay.
Paula Raymond. Hi, Paula. Can you hear us okay?
I can.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Have to unmute and stop the video. So, I'm in Florida, so I couldn't be there today, but always appreciate that we have this as a resource. So listening to all the great things that are happening, and just wanted to reflect on what our Chief Bonnie has mentioned, and just a couple of questions for him. When it comes to the community information, I'm sure he doesn't have a date and time for that, but very much interested in how the community is going to be made aware of whatever information. I'm assuming it's going to be public notification in some way, and where we'll meet and time and that kind of thing. So, and then he and I, Bill, you and I had some conversations a while back about some of the vandalism that were happening, some of the mischief that was going on in our community in the South End. And we touched lightly on maybe a different way to approach what's going on. And I wondered if that's something that we can look at again in the future, because I thought it was a good idea, and I know you felt the same way. I also want to congratulate you. I took pictures of every slide you put up there because I want to be able to reread it myself and go over it. You've created a lot of different avenues of cleaning up the department and taking care of, bringing it to the 21st century and bringing it to what we need in our city. So very pleased about that and excited about what that's going to look like in the future.
Thanks,
Okay.
Paula. So we absolutely will make sure that there's plenty of public notice, and we'll put that on social media. We'll put it on email, and we'll make announcements about that before it happens so that we can make sure we get as many people as possible to that event. And as far as the deflection and diversion conversation that we had, absolutely, I'm always willing to explore other options that might be more successful than entering young people into the criminal justice system. The particular conversation that we were having went astray for other reasons, but I absolutely think that we can work on those issues in the future together.
Okay, and for our soon-to-be not city manager, temporary city manager, congratulations, Bill, for coming back to the job you originally applied for. You've done a great job taking the place, and we're very personable, very willing to listen and talk and share. So as an individual, as a constituent, I do appreciate it, and I'm sure you're happy to get back into the position you originally came to our city for. So congratulations on that, and thank you so much for taking the time and the energy and your expertise in doing, helping us along while we were waiting to fill that slot.
Thank you, Paula. I appreciate that.
And I think that's
Okay.
it. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Paula. Anyone else? No one else online?
No.
Okay, great. So moving on to the consent agenda.
So moved.
Do we
We can call
need
for
a
a
roll call?
vote.
No, we just show of hands?
Call for a vote, yep.
Yep.
All in favor, raise your hand. Passes unanimously. Is there a motion to read all items by title only?
Yes, ma'am.
All in favor?
So resolution 121,
Resolution 117
I'm sorry.
No, that's
Yes,
okay.
right, we already did that.
dash
Okay.
2023, amend the public safety ordinance.
Move to adopt.
Second. All right.
Discussion.
Well, I think this is, this is where we want to, I think, or, I mean, I don't we, but I would like to add an amendment to, or amend some of the verbiage in this, and I think we can incorporate both schools of thought. One was changing the and or, and then some verbiage to allow for a 24-hour for that and or to take place. Right, I think that, so if we can,
Yes.
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion?
I think it's a good. I think it's a good compromise. Obviously, checks and balances are important, and you know, my only concern was that anybody that would be displaced due to something beyond their control, because obviously we have a homelessness issue in the city, and I don't want, and you know, I mean, if we can utilize Red Cross and other programs to ensure that families aren't just hanging out on the street, I think that you know, I think this is all right.
I certainly agree with you. I think just backing up a step or two, it really underlines the need for good code enforcement in our city, so we don't get to the points like this where we have to actually evict someone because of public safety. And I certainly have the utmost confidence in our chief public safety officer, Chief Essler, and the code enforcement officer to make those determinations. And the code department's been doing a great job and being proactive about making sure that we have safe buildings. So I think I'm also in favor of this amendment. Anyone else? Okay.
So we can
to
call
vote?
for a vote on the amendment. All in favor?
This is an ordinance. Do we have to vote by,
That was on the amendment. Now we need to move it as amended.
So moved. Second.
And it is an ordinance, so it does require a roll call vote for the last vote, if there's any more discussion.
All right, last chance. I think we're good.
All set? Counselor Gilly?
Yes.
Counselor DeBrito?
Yes.
Counselor Klepak?
Yes.
Counselor Green?
Yes.
Counselor Morris?
Yes.
Counselor Frankie?
yes?
Counselor McCormick?
Yes.
The vote is 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
Moving on to new business.
Resolution 122-2023, refer to the Planning Board zoning map amendment 350 Kennedy Memorial Drive.
Move to adopt?
Second.
So we do have City Planner Ann Beveridge here. We also have Bill Mitchell, who can certainly speak to this, I think.
Good evening, everyone. As Bill said, my name is Bill Mitchell. I have worked in Waterville for the last 43 years, and some of you may know for the last 23 years I've done a lot of real estate development around the city, and have worked with city leadership on many projects. And just as a point of reference on a couple of them, upstairs you may know that Days Jewelers, I was fortunate to retain their corporate department of 50 employees to stay in Waterville. They were contemplating making a move. Over the years, I've added 20 apartments to the city's inventory of apartments. And of course, this council chambers, we've worked together, Patty and I, and city leadership to try to accommodate your needs with this. And of course, a voting place upstairs, Patty 3 or 4 times over the years since I've owned this building. So I've tried to be a partner with the city wherever I can and trying to improve conditions here. My latest project is a proposed solar farm on Kennedy Memorial Drive at 350 Kennedy Memorial Drive. To be specific, that's the building that houses Subway, Portland Glass. You may be familiar with that at the top of the hill on Kennedy Memorial Drive. There's about a 1 acre parcel of land behind that building that I've looked at all the various possibilities of trying to figure out the best use of redeveloping that land. It's currently zoned commercial C. And part of the complication on that part of the site is there's a sewer easement that runs a 45-degree angle across the site. It picks up the discharge from what we usually refer to as J&S Oil, but it's Irving, and dumps into this sewer line that runs across the back of the property and then discharges out somewhere out onto the airport road. I've spoken with John Jansen about this, and John is very receptive to working with me to not only maintain the 30-foot easement that the sewer district has, but accommodating the project overall. And John's been very good to work with, as is everybody with the city. I do have a handout to try to better show you an aerial, if I may approach the council with this.
So you're talking about this wood lot back there?
Exactly. Yes, there's a wooded lot in the back of the building. Again, it's about a 1 acre parcel. And I'm working with Revision Energy. Some of you may be familiar with the Revision. They've done quite a lot of work around town. I think they or others they're working with have been here to talk about other potential solar farms in Waterville. And the request, as I've been working with Ann Beveridge on this, is to take the back parcel and subdivide that so that it's zoned airport industrial, and if I understand that correctly. And airport industrial allows for solar farms with a 20-foot buffer around the property lines. And that would allow me to maximize the farm. And the objective is I own quite a lot of real estate now in Waterville, 28 buildings to be exact, and 60 to 70 commercial tenants, 20 apartments. There's a lot of energy being consumed by those buildings. Believe it or not, this farm would not be enough to accommodate the consumption of those buildings, but it would be fairly significant. It sounds more than it is, 500,000 kilowatts. Sounds like a lot, but it's not a ton, but it's a pretty significant dent in the consumption of electricity being used in those buildings. And so, it's an opportunity for me to extend some savings to my tenants and those that would sign up to be part of the farm, and strengthen, their financial statements with some savings on utilities. I think you probably would all agree utilities have gone up a lot in the last 2 or 3 years, not just on electricity, but natural gas has skyrocketed and so forth. And so the people that I interact with, the business community on a daily basis, they're looking for ways all the time to try to save money. It's a significant investment for me. It would be certainly a fairly substantial risk, but I'm prepared to take that on. I've got several tenants that have expressed interest in wanting to be part of this project, and would switch from consuming electricity directly from Central Maine Power, from whatever sources they're getting it from, through green energy produced in Waterville, Maine, in a solar farm on a piece of property that has no better use than as I see it, for something like this. And so I'm here to ask you if you would, I think the ask is to refer me to the planning board to discuss this with them, and then whatever that process is, come back here, go back there. Honestly, it's a little clunky, if I could be honest with you folks about it, but I'm here to ask whatever the next step is to help me advance this project. We're on a little bit of a timeline. We're trying to get some of the infrastructure of this in this fall, so the array can be installed early in the spring and maximize the benefits. That you don't want to open an array in the fall going into winter. Ideally, you want to open it in the spring going into the highest output months if you can. So whatever the next step is, Ann, is it asked to refer to the planning board?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's my ask. Happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead, Councillor Kleepak.
So looking at this parcel, what direction is it graded in? Is it?
Well, it's a relatively flat parcel, but the grade would go slightly west, which would be to our left as you're looking down on this.
Yep. And if the development were to go through, so I'm not exactly sure where the property line is here. Would there be trees on the south end of the property line that are not on that property that wouldn't be cleared? Because I'm imagining you're going to clear everything up to the southern edge, probably east and west lines as well.
At least the east, the beginnings of that, I think, Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyways, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Is there going to be any occlusion from the abutter along the southern margin there?
I haven't had that conversation with them yet.
Yeah.
So
So I see Aviation Way. Your
Yes.
property line doesn't go directly.
Not quite to it. It's a
Yeah.
little short of it. So there may be a few trees in there remaining if the abutter would not be agreeable to me removing those.
Gotcha. Yeah, on their property, right?
Right.
But you would not necessarily need to remove any trees that would act as a screen along the northern edge, a screen between the field and KMD. I guess it's probably pretty hard to see back there from KMD.
This aerial is actually there's a lot of trees back there. So, but to complete disclosure here, I see pretty much the entire lot being cleared because of the need to maximize the trajectory of the sun coming across the array. Now that said, I am personally conscientious and not in favor of clear cutting if I don't have to. So I would do everything I could to try to maintain, and I've talked to Revision about this, whatever I could around the perimeter that makes the most sense. But keep in mind, on the easterly border, I'm abutted to a self-storage building.
Yeah.
And the back of a service station. In the easterly, there would be some exposure there. I'm pretty friendly with those neighbors. I've accommodated some things for them. My guess is they'd work with me. And in the back, of course, again, we're looking at self-storage buildings. I'm not dismissing the appeal of those, but my sense is it's not a critical consideration.
Any other comments? I have a question. You mentioned people subscribing to this farm. Could you say more about that and how people might benefit from that?
Sure, thank you. So when I first started to develop the idea of a farm, it was not all utilities in my buildings are in tenants' names. A number of accounts are in my name for a lot of different reasons. This building, for example, 100% of the utilities of this 25,000 square foot building are in my name. And it's actually this building that drove me to this process. I need to figure out how to lower my costs so I can pay my real estate taxes. So it all adds up, right? And so it started with that, Rebecca, as how can I transition some of my utility costs into a solar situation? And so I opened up a dialogue with Revision. I was originally looking to do some solar panels on this site. And as the dialogue evolved, it came to, well, gee, if you had a piece of land, you might be able to do more than just this site. So with that sort of as the backdrop, I was looking for a way to generate electricity through solar for my properties. The site can accommodate twice as much as my demand. So my demand is about 250,000 kilowatt hours. The site can produce 500,000 kilowatt hours. So that took that idea and said, well, maybe I could open that up to some of my tenants to see if they would have interest in being part of this, not as an investor, but as a tenant that I could offer somewhat of a discount to. And it's all accepted within the process of the PUC through CMP through Revision. So that piece has all been covered. And interestingly enough, some said yes, some said no. And so I've got several well-known businesses here. You would all recognize the names if I were to rattle them off, but I'm not, that have expressed interest in this. And so that would take the remaining capacity of the other 250,000 kilowatt hours and distribute that to them through the grid.
Okay.
So, Bill, you regaled us with all of the many ways that you've helped Waterville with development over the years. So you would know better than probably anyone in this room what the capacity for earnings that a particular property zoned the way it is currently might have. And in your estimation, so the sustainability question aside, right? Just because you were talking about taxes and lowering your cost and your utility burden, et cetera. It's your belief that you can generate more income for yourself using this space if this space were to become a solar farm rather than be developed in the way that is currently zoned.
I would answer it a little bit differently than the economics to me. The answer to that is yes, but let me give you a little bit of background on that why. I've explored putting a building back there, but I've explored warehousing, maybe an office building of some sort, which when you get off the main drag, it becomes what I call secondary office space or secondary rental space. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants storefront, right? So when you get off the main drag, it gets more challenging to get market rate rents, right? So, and you all know, I'm sure, that the cost of construction has gone up drastically in the last 3 to 4 years. And so the economics just don't work well on, and Rebecca and I have had this conversation about other topics around real estate development. The economics don't work well, Tom. When you build brand new construction or try to buy an old building and revamp it and rent it out, it's really difficult to make the numbers work. And in commercial real estate and residential, the market in Waterville, Maine will only bear so much. And the math doesn't work. And so the math on the solar piece works better. A lot of it is because of the federal tax credits that are passing through the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a 30% credit. You can maybe get 40 if you use U.S. parts or through countries that are U.S. friendly. And so the economics work on that a little bit better. They're not great, but they're not bad. Yes, sir.
Looking at your structure, is that building capable of supporting an array on top of it? I'm not saying it's your property. I'm not going to do what you want with it. It just doesn't make sense to me sometimes. We're going to cut down a tree with everybody crying for green space in this town to put up a solar array.
It's a great point. And thank you
so
for...
instead of taking the trees out, can some of these sit on top of the building? Is the building structurally sound to support?
The answer is yes, but if I may, that roof is about 15, 18 years old, so it has 8 or 10 more years of life in it. If I needed to replace it today, it would be $475,000 to replace the roof. So now I just won't do either, right? Because again, to invest that kind of capital in a new roof prematurely to support solar, I can't charge enough rent to make it all work. So you go to kind of plan B. And that's where this started, was array on this roof, but there are trees on the abutting neighbor's property that make it prohibitive. So I've tried to evaluate all the options, and not that you care about this, but I was brought up in a family by a father that hated to cut a branch off a tree, much less a tree. And so, yeah, we're tree huggers, all right. But sometimes, for the greater good of development and advancing other benefits, I think it might make sense to clear this lot, put an array in, and reduce production of electricity by oil and coal that's coming through the CMP grid.
Or Bill, just, I wanted to just clarify what we're asking the planning board to do. That's rezone this property from commercial C to airport industrial?
That's correct. But you would be referring it to the planning board for a public hearing.
Right.
And the planning board would recommend back to you. And if you decided that you did want to rezone the property, he would have to bring the project to the planning board for site plan review, which would require notifying the abutters again. The abutters have to be notified of
Right.
the public hearing for the rezoning request at the planning board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm really just interested in the change in land use, you know, the zoning, the actual zoning change that this would entail. And also, I guess, just for the future, I think that the council should take a look globally. I mean, I have nothing against this project, but we've had a number of solar projects come forward, and we have a number that are already operating, and some are probably a better, you know, model than others. So I would just really like to see us dig into this a little more. I know we used to have a solar committee, but there are lots of elements here to consider especially when rezoning a property. So that's all. But obviously those discussions can happen at the planning board, as they should.
And Mrs. Beveridge, it's adjacent. This parcel is adjacent to airport industrial currently, right? Is there any intervening commercial C, or would it be a contiguous parcel then?
You have the zoning map in your packet.
Yeah.
Can you pull that up?
There's one parcel between me and the airport.
Oh, so it's
Right.
yeah, okay.
There
But
is a
there-
parcel between, that is not, so I am not abutting airport industrial.
Gotcha.
I'm one parcel away.
Gotcha.
One of the maps I put in your packet shows the properties around the airport, and there are numerous parcels around the airport that are in the airport industrial zone, and 2 of them currently have solar farms on them.
I see.
Okay, any further comments, questions? Anyone online?
But to be clear, you're not requesting the entire parcel from KMD back. You're behind behind your building.
Yes.
So we're gonna draw a line there. So when we look at this, it's really just this wooded section that we're
1
little
acre.
stamp. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
It's roughly where the pavement ends.
Yeah.
And the blue stripes are indicators of where the solar panels would be located, approximately.
And the reason for airport industrial is the setbacks versus what we did over at Central Maine Motors, where they're just industrial, right? Or what do we do for them?
I think they're.
Boy, I have that over there. I can't remember.
We
think
did
they're
that with
airport
airport industrial as
industrial.
well,
I
Mike.
think it was airport industrial, yeah.
Where was, I just didn't see that.
I
just
know,
didn't-
the map hasn't been changed.
Okay,
yet.
all right,
That's why
that
you're
makes,
not
okay,
seeing it.
perfect, okay.
But
Okay,
that is the reason to maximize the array.
yeah,
Again,
that makes sense.
The economics are on the margin, right? So that extra
Sure.
30 feet by the depth of it on either side, it may not seem much on a piece of paper, but in the production of electricity, it's almost a make or break. Because we started talking about industrial, and then we went to airport industrial because revision said it won't work with a 50-foot
Yeah,
setback.
I get it. I mean, we just had people that wanted to take parking spaces reduce parking
Yeah.
spaces a half foot. And you're like, yeah, it didn't. But when you add up the number of spaces, it absolutely does.
It matters.
Makes all the difference. Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
I've done this for a long time. Never
Yeah.
a solar farm, but I'm kind of excited about it, to be honest. It's kind of a cool project. And I actually think it helps Waterville, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, on your sort of broader strategic plan of, isn't climate on there? Isn't there a reference to climate on your own, sort of agenda for the future of Waterville? So it seems to me that this is a really nice tie-in and do it correctly, but, it gives Waterville another, quiver of what we're trying to do and differentiate ourselves to attract people here. But I'm at your mercy, so, whatever you all think. But as I see it, after all my years of development, this is definitely the best use of this property that I can come up with. Otherwise, it'll probably sit vacant for the next 50 years.
I personally see no harm in, referring it to the planning board, especially if there's an opportunity for a public hearing. I'd like to know what the public has to say about this as well, so.
Yeah, it's the obvious next step.
All right.
Yeah.
With that, let's
We can call
Do
for a
it.
vote. All those
Call
in
for a vote.
favor? 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn? All right.
Second.
Thank you, everyone.